The Shep Naz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shep Naz Podcast. I'm Joe, and I'm your host today. And today, we normally hear this button.
Worship Wednesday.
But as you can see, I am here by myself, and it is not Pastor Zach or Noah. In fact, we're all getting ready for Thanksgiving, as I'm sure you are. But this week, we're continuing in our message series from the summer of 2022, the One Hit Wonder series. And they're all short books of the Bible that we've been tackling each day of this week. And today, we're going to take a look at a message from Pastor Rob on the book of 3 John. So here's a message from Pastor Rob.
John wrote this letter to address two challenges that the early church was facing. And a lot of the letters in the New Testament that were written by Paul or Peter or John were written to address a specific issue. And the two specific issues that this letter was written to address were, number one, the importance of hospitality in the church, and number two, how to deal with unhealthy leadership. So let's walk through the letter and look at some of the things that we can lift out of. The first thing, verses 1 through 4, is just a greeting, right? And John's letter typifies the contemporary style of letters that were written in this day. If you find any other letters written in this day, they typically start off like this. There's a greeting, there's a prayer for good health, and then there's the content of the letter. But I think what's interesting to note is that everyone in that day, but especially John, placed value on the physical health of Gaius as well as his spiritual health. So it's like John's not just concerned about his spiritual health, he's concerned about the leader's physical health as well, right? And he says, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. And John recognized that there's a connection between our physical health and our spiritual health in our ministry, and that our spiritual ministry is affected by our physical health. And so it's important for us to care for the temple that God has given to us, which is the home of God's presence and the place where the Holy Spirit dwells. And so I just thought that was interesting. Not the point of the whole thing, but thought it was interesting to throw that in there. Second thing is that John placed great value on his spiritual family. And you can see there that Gaius was John's spiritual son. He says, it gives me great joy to have some brothers come and tell about your faithfulness of truth and how you continue to walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking with him. Remember, we talked a couple of weeks ago when John was talking about his spiritual son and Paul was talking about his spiritual son. Gaius wasn't really his son. He was his spiritual son, so he calls him his brother, right? So a spiritual father is someone who's responsible for the conversion and discipleship of another person. And so Paul was continuing to stay connected to those people that he had relationships with. John was, and that was really cool thing to see as well. And then in the verses 5 through 8, there's two parts of the letter. There's a commending what's happening, and then there's a confronting what's going on. So commending Christian hospitality and leadership. So the first thing that Paul says is that Gaius was this excellent example of leadership and hospitality to the other pioneers, right? So Gaius recognized there are several things that he did that made him a good leader in that area. First of all is that he recognized the need for doctrinal and practical guidance from the apostles. Like Gaius wanted these new apostles to come, the apostles to come. He wanted the teaching from them. He wanted to hear them. He wanted the church to hear those things. And so he recognized things. So what Gaius was doing was allowing the apostles to come in and to teach on a regular basis. And by doing this, he was literally helping to strengthen and mature the faith of the people in the church. And John was commending this action by Gaius. Gaius was also helping the traveling apostles by giving them a place to stay when they were in town and ministering to the congregation. And this is important to know, that there weren't hotels like we have now. They didn't have hotels back then, but they had inns. And inns were usually places where there was inappropriate behavior happening. And so it was often the case was one of the traveling teachers or an evangelist or a prophet or whatever would typically not stay in an inn because they would be surrounded by inappropriate activity. And they were almost always be receiving the hospitality of the people in the church. And so this is what John is saying. He's like, John, I'm thankful that you are allowing the traveling teachers, the prophets and the evangelists to come and stay there. By allowing that, you're really, really helping them. And then finally, he was helping to support their ministry financially as they were seeking to plant churches in new areas. So it was incredibly important that they had the support of all these other churches. And this is what Gaius was doing. Gaius also submitted to the spiritual oversight of the apostles and the fellowship of the church. And I say church, I mean the church with a capital C, not just their local church, but the church as well. And so by welcoming the apostles and traveling missionaries, Gaius was coming under the authority and the teachings of the church. And this was such an important act. And this is something that I think is important for even us as a church, that we have we have authority as a church, but we're also under the authority. And we should always be under the authority of the capital C, the church, not just doing our own thing as well. And since this church was so new, there were lots of false teaching that was being spreading around, which is even why John wrote the second letter, right? So Gaius was literally protecting the church by welcoming the apostles and traveling missionaries as well. And then Gaius accepted the responsibility to care for each other, including the traveling teachers, by making them partners. This is what John says. He says, they have told the church here, the traveling teachers have told the church here of your loving friendship. Please continue providing for such teachers in a manner that pleases God. It was for the sake of the name that they went out receiving no help from the pagans. We ought therefore to show hospitality to such men so that they may work together for the truth. And so these apostles, they traveled full time, right, from town to town, and they didn't have the opportunity to work other jobs like the other people did. And so their support literally came from the churches. It had to come from the churches, right, because they couldn't go out and take an offering from people who didn't know Jesus. They were not going to share their resources with them. So the only base of support that these traveling pastors had, or the pioneers had, was the churches that were established. And Gaius was encouraging that, right? So he was encouraging the churches to support them financially, giving them a place to stay. And this was so important, such an important role. And literally, because of Gaius' leadership, the church was growing. And John said, Gaius, what you are doing is you're becoming a partner with them. You're not going, but you're making it possible for them to go. And I just want to say that that's still true today, isn't it? That there are places that we can't go, things that we can't necessarily do, but by praying and by giving and supporting those who can go, we're partnering with that. I think about what we do as a church for One, that every single week we support some ministry or some global cause or need, right, or that exists out there. And we maybe can't go to all of these places, but by giving, we're supporting them. We support missionaries. The missionaries that we support who are working in places that we can't go, speaking languages that we can't speak. We can't do those things, but by supporting them, we have this partnership in this. And so it says in your notes that you too are a partner in the gospel by giving and by praying. And that every dollar you give, whether it's here to Shepherd or at Faith Fellowship, is used to advance the gospel. You think about all the places that our money goes and our resources go. It's not just here. We want to be a generous churches that we can share our resources with other people. And because of that, we're partners with what God is doing all around the world. It's not just about what's happening on our corner. It's not just what's happening on 62 at Faith Fellowship. It's not just what's happening wherever you are watching online. It's about what God is doing all around the world that we have this opportunity to participate in. So John's like, Gaius, you're a healthy leader. You're doing a great job. You're partnering with them, and because of your resources and because of your sharing, because you're opening it up, you're doing an amazing job. So after John comments on the healthy leadership, he turns to a new topic in his letter, and he begins to condemn the unhealthy leadership that exists. And we see that in verses 9 through 10. He says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will have nothing to do with this. So he says, so if I come, I'll call attention to what he's doing, gossiping maliciously about us. Not satisfied with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers. He also stops those who want to do so, and he puts them out of the church. And so there's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot of accusations that John makes there, right? So Diotrephes, this other leader in the church, this is what he does. First of all, he rejected the apostles' teaching and their teaching, jeopardizing the church's health. So he says when the apostles come, he wouldn't let them stay. So he's rejecting the teaching from the apostles. And one of the things I was reading earlier in the week said that it's possible that John wrote other letters that never even got read to the church because Diotrephes intercepted them and destroyed them. So there could be other letters that were written to the church that we don't know anything about that Diotrephes got and said, I don't want the church to know about these kind of things. But he was rejecting the apostles' teachings. He was inhospitable to any of the other apostles and their delegates, right? So when a missionary or an evangelist or a prophet would come to the church to invest in the church, he was not hospitable to them, right? He would not give them a place to stay and would make sure that no one in the church allowed them to stay in their home as well. It'd be like if we had an evangelist come to the church and so, I didn't want them to come or whatever, I could say, none of you, don't let him stay with you. And if he does stay with you, you're a bad person or whatever. That's what Diotrephes was doing, right? And then he was gossiping about the apostles and their messages to make himself look better. And here's what you know about gossip, right? When someone comes to you in an inappropriate way to gossip about leadership, it is usually a sign that they think they can do a better job, or at least that they would like the position or the prestige. And it may be that a leader is not doing well, but the appropriate way to deal with a leader is to do it through proper channels of authority, not gossiping. But this is what Diotrephes was doing. He was gossiping about them, right? He was talking about to other members about the church, about leaders in the church, and telling about them about how bad they were and how terrible of a job they were doing. And here's what we know about gossip: that gossip is always rooted in insecurity, right? Gossip is always designed to make someone else look bad so that that person speaking can make themselves look better. We also know, we also know that gossip always hurts the person who's being gossiped about. And you should always know that when someone is gossiping to a healthy person, it always hurts the gossiper, because a healthy person understands the motivation behind gossip, right? So if someone comes to you and starts gossiping to you about someone else, you should know there's something unhealthy going on there, because if they're gossiping to you about someone else, there's a chance someday when you make them mad, they're going to be gossiping about you to someone else as well. And none of that is healthy, right? The Bible says that's not how we should deal with it. If you have a problem with someone, you go to that person, and Diotrephes was not doing that. He was talking bad about John. He was talking bad about the apostles. He probably thought he could do a better job. And none of these were qualities of a leader that should be in the church, let alone a follower of Jesus. Diotrephes also went on and he forbade members of and leaders from showing the other apostles hospitality. And so he was like, I don't even want you to let anybody else stay in your house if they come to the church. And if they did, he removed them from membership of the church, right? So if someone were to open up their house to an apostle or to a traveling missionary or teacher or an evangelist or prophet, Diotrephes heard about it, he would remove them from the church, right? So he was very unhealthy. There was nothing good about the leadership that Diotrephes was giving to the church. And so the next thing in your note says, well, why did Diotrephes respond like this? Why was he doing these kinds of things? And John knew exactly what it was. John says in verse 9 and 10, he says, I wrote the church by Diotrephes, who loved to be first, will have nothing to do with us. Right, John hit the nail on the head. He goes, well, it's because he likes to be first. Like he wants to be important, right? And this phrase, he wanted to be first, is the word philoprotuo, and it means a desire to be first in order of importance, right? So in other words, Diotrephes didn't want anybody to have authority over him. He wanted to be the most important person. He wanted everybody to look at him and say, you're the man, you're the most important one. And if there was anybody else who had more authority or who could come in and teach something, he didn't want any of that, because someone might think that other person had more authority. So it's a desire to be first in order of importance, or to order others while not paying attention to authority. So in other words, he wanted to be seen as the most important person, and he wanted to be the boss, right? He wanted to tell everybody what to do. But here's what we know about this. This desire is always rooted in arrogance and rebellion, right? To want to be first, to want to be the most important person, to want to be the boss and to be in charge is always rooted in arrogance and rebellion. In fact, a healthy leader recognizes that the authority that they have is a great responsibility, right? It's a great responsibility. It's not like you don't have more rights or whatever. You don't have more privileges. You have more responsibilities as a leader. But an unhealthy leader wants these rights and these privileges for the wrong reasons. And so this desire is always rooted in arrogance and rebellion. And we see that Diotrephes was being arrogant, right? So it says he was in clear conflict with Jesus and Peter's teachings regarding authority in the church. So look at what Jesus said about the church. Jesus says this. Jesus called the apostles and he said, you know that the rulers of nations have absolute power over people and their officials have absolute authority over people. But that's not the way it is going to be among you. Whoever wants to become great among you will be your servant. Whoever wants to be the most important among you will be your slave. And it's the same way with the Son of Man. He didn't come so that others could serve him. He came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus says in the kingdom of God, leadership is flipped upside down. A leader is not necessarily the great person. A leader is the servant of everyone. The leader is not necessarily first. The leader is last, right? But this is not what Diotrephes wanted to do. He listened to the teaching of Jesus and he flipped it upside down, and he wanted to be important. He wanted to be first. He wanted to be the boss. But that's not how Jesus wanted it, right? He wanted to be in charge. He wanted to be the only one to call the shots. So we see this arrogance in him. And then Diotrephes was also being rebellious. So in Acts chapter 14, verse 23, Luke is recording the history of the church as the church kind of gathers and is organized and figures things out and everything. And one of the leadership principles in the church was that there was always dual leadership. There was not just one person who was in charge of everything. And in Acts chapter 14, verse 23, here's what it says, that Paul and Barnabas would go to these churches and they would appoint elders. And notice, I underlined the word elders and I put it in, it's plural, right? Elders. And it's not an elder, it's elders, right? So Paul and Barnabas appointed elders for them in each church, and with prayer and fasting committed them to the Lord in whom they had put their trust. And so Paul and Barnabas and all the leaders of the early church recognized that it was dangerous to put one man in charge, because one man can go rogue or go astray or whatever. But in the presence of dual leadership or leaders where there's a team, right? You can have maybe a guy who can go off, but you can have another person who can bring him back or whatever. And our churches, all of our churches, this church and Faith Fellowship have dual leadership. We have pastors and we have boards and there's accountability to superintendents and all these other kinds of things. And that's healthy. Diotrephes didn't want anything to do with this. He wanted to be the lone leader like a dictator. And there were other leaders that were appointed in this church. And one of them was Gaius, right? But Diotrephes didn't want to lead with him or anyone else. He wanted to have the power all by himself. And it kind of reminds me of the scripture in Isaiah and in Ezekiel that describes Satan before the fall. Like he wanted all the credit. He wanted all the authority. He thought everyone should look to him. He thought he was all that. This is the same thing that Diotrephes is doing. And so in verses 10 through 13, John's like, here's how we're going to deal with this problem. So here's what I love about John. He's like, we're going to confront the problem. We're not going to let it fester. We're not going to let it just boil under the surface. We're going to confront the problem. So John says, there's lots of things I want to say to you, but I'm not writing them down. I'm going to show up, right? So John planned to visit the church and call Diotrephes out. He was going to call him out. He was going to get in front of the whole church and say, dude, what this guy is doing is wrong. So I love it. He says, I will come and I will call attention to what he is doing. And I can remember when I was younger, I strongly disliked conflict. Like if there was someone mad at me or frustrated with me, I couldn't sleep at night. I had talked to Monica about it. She probably got tired of it all the time because there's always conflict, right? And I just remember I hated conflict, right? And I'm still not a great fan of conflict. I like it when we all get along and everything is good. But here's something that I've learned over the years is that I've learned to recognize that conflict has value to grow and strengthen myself and our ministry as well. And most people don't like conflict either. But in the church or anything else that is worth fighting for, listen, if you're part of something that is worth fighting for, conflict has to be dealt with. Because if you don't deal with it, it's just going to fester and it's going to get worse, right? So conflict, what we should do is learn to see conflict as an ally if we confront it properly, because there's one of two things is going to happen, right? So you have a conflict and you confront it. There's two options in this case. First option is that the person's going to have the opportunity to admit they're wrong, grow from it, and become a better leader, right? This is what Diotrephes could do. When John shows up and calls him out and says, you're doing something that's unhealthy, he is going to have the opportunity to say, you're right, I'm sorry, I'm going to grow from it, I'm going to become a better leader, I'm going to submit to the authority of the church and the Lord and what Jesus wanted us to do, and he's going to be better for it. Or that person is going to be removed from leadership and the church will no longer suffer under the unhealthy leadership. So one of these two things was going to happen. If Diotrephes says, well, no, I'm the leader, then John, who was the leader, the elder, right, was going to say, you're out of here, brother. And he was going to save the church. And it wasn't because he was trying to be mean to Diotrephes, it's because the church matters, right? If you're involved in something that matters, conflict, you have to deal with it as well. So conflict was an ally. So John's going to call it out. And when this letter is read to the church, if Diotrephes is present, think of how he would feel, right? Because the letter came to Gaius. It was going to be read to the whole church. And Diotrephes was going to be there, right? So John's like, here's what's coming. I'm going to show up and I'm going to call it out and everything. And so Diotrephes is probably like, I got to change my ways or get out of town, right? Because those are the things that are going to happen. And so he says we got to confront it. And then the second thing he says we need to focus on positive examples, right? Don't focus on the negative thing. When you're involved in a conflict, you can just focus on this negative stuff so much that it consumes you, right? But John says, dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. right? He's like, Gaius, don't just focus on the negative stuff. Don't just focus on the bad things that are happening. Focus on the good things, because we all know that anyone who does what is good is from God, and anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. So John's literally saying, if this guy keeps doing evil, don't focus on him because he's the bad example. Don't follow him, right? So we got to find some positive and encouraging examples. And then John goes, the other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to confront the problem. I'm going to encourage you to focus on positive things. And then he says, I'm going to encourage you with reinforcement and backup from Demetrius. So John says, I'm sending backup. I'm sending another healthy leader who will stand beside you, link arms with you, and fight this fight that you're fighting for the church, because the church is worth fighting for, right? And so in 3 John chapter 12, he says, Demetrius is well spoken of. He's a new character in the letter now. He's well spoken of by everyone, even by the truth itself. We also speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. So no doubt, right? In the middle of this conflict, Gaius is feeling alone and maybe a little bullied. And what's the best remedy when you're being bullied? You get an ally, right? You get somebody who comes alongside you and stands beside you, crosses their arms and says, we're not taking your stuff anymore, right? And that's what Demetrius was. He was going to stand right next to Gaius and say to Diotrephes, we're not taking your stuff anymore. We don't need that, right? And so it's to strengthen and to encourage him. And so John sent Demetrius with the letter. So here's the really cool thing. Think about this. Demetrius was a strong leader. John gave him 3 impressive references, right? The first one was everyone speaks well of him, and he's widely respected. He lived his life with integrity in a way that lined up with the truth, and I personally know him, and I'm vouching for him, right? So John says, Demetrius is coming, and now imagine how Gaius must have felt as he's reading the letter, right, that John has sent, and he looks up, and there standing before him is this guy, Demetrius, who delivered the letter. He's like, man, I'm reading it, and now he's here, right? And so he's got to be strengthened and encouraged, and it must have been this hope-filled moment as he realized that he was no longer alone, and that the church was going to be safe, and that the problem was going to be eliminated one way or another, whether it was Diotrephes changing and growing as a leader, or whether it was removing him from the church as well. And then the last thing in the letter is probably one more good shot in the arm for Gaius. And John says, not only am I sending Demetrius, but eventually I'm going to show up and I'm going to be there as well. So he's getting this personal visit from John. I mean, it's sort of like having the president say, I'm going to show up, I'm going to support you and encourage you or whatever, right? So in 3 John chapter 13 and 14, he says, I have so much to write to you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace to you. The friends here send greetings. Greet the friends there by name. And so when you think about all that's wrapped up in this letter, there's so much in this shortest letter, right, about how we can take care of these things. And so what are the takeaways? So let's just kind of walk through really quick about some takeaways, because we live in a world where there's lots of conflict as well. And there's bad news to take away, right? The bad news is that there's always going to be a Diotrephes somewhere, right? There will always be unhealthy leaders with unhealthy motives in almost anything that we're involved in. Whether it's church, whether it's school, whether it's sports, whether it's where you work, whether it's with your family, whether it's your homeowners association, whether it's government, whether it's a school board, whatever. There's always going to be unhealthy leadership. There's always going to be there. We're going to be involved with unhealthy leadership, and there's always a temptation to become negative and divisive and follow their bad example. But if we took the example of John, we would say, I'm not going to be like that, right? I'm going to be different. I recognize unhealthy leadership, and I'm going to follow a good example, because this is not what God has called us to. But the good news is this, is that even in every church or every organization, there's a Diotrephes. There's also a Gaius and a Demetrius in every organization as well, right? There's always somebody there that God has planted. The Bible talks about the remnant, that a remnant will remain, that there's always, no matter what, a remnant of the people of God who are faithful and true to God and His Word. And these are the people that are going to stand and are going to fight for the goodness of the church, right? And so every church has one. There's always someone around who's a positive example that you can follow. Someone who will be your ally and support you in your efforts to do the right thing, even when under pressure. And if you don't have someone like that, you need to find someone like that. You need to find an ally, someone who can be a good example, who you can focus on. Every church has them. Every organization has them. They usually aren't the loud ones. They're not always up front in the limelight. They are the servants. They're the ones that are not selfish. They're the ones whose walk epitomizes the fruit of the Spirit with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness. You can find them, and when you find them, you got to follow them because they're the pattern, right? And we pattern our life after those who look and act like Jesus, and then we will also look and act like Jesus as well. And that's our goal as followers of Christ, right? So you can always be that example as well of and an ally of spiritual health to someone as well. And then finally this, conflict always offers opportunities for growth. And I know that you're probably, can't imagine anybody who likes conflict, but we're going to find it wherever we go, right? And what we need to do is see conflict as an ally. It's an opportunity for me to grow, or for the other person to grow, or for you to grow, for all of us to grow, or whatever. And I don't know if you're dealing with a conflict in wherever you work or wherever, but if you are dealing with conflict, the Bible gives us a great way of dealing with it, and that is to confront it and confront it in love, and then to allow the Lord to work through it as well, right? So we should have followed the example in 3 John. And I think finally the last thing is this, that there is such great wisdom in staying connected to spiritual oversight and to the fellowship of the church. The truth is we really do need each other, amen? We really, really do need each other.
Well, I hope now you have a little better understanding of the book of 3 John. And I hope as you might be making preparations for Thanksgiving tomorrow that all is going well with you and your family. If you're looking for things that are going on at the church, you can go to shepnaz.org. Also, we always love it if you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Share those posts and share them with people that might be touched by the message just like you have. For Pastor Rob, I'm Joe. Have a great day. This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.